Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, August 27th. This is the Konflux Community Architecture Call. On the screen, we have the agenda for today. We've got 3 items. And Brian just joined, and he has the first one.
You're on mute, Brian.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it together here. I just joined it. Wow. Good morning. Yeah, I've talked to a bunch of you like individually, I guess, as along the way of this doc. We'll try to share it here.
I have it up here.
Oh, you've got it open. Okay, so today we have this application component model, which we inherited from App Studio, and it works, pretty well for what it was designed for. Where you have an application, and the application owns its components, and there can be one component, there can be as many components as you want, basically, right? And like I said, it works pretty well for a lot of use cases. But we've run into a number of use cases where it doesn't work so well, and it led me to imagine like if there would be alternatives to the way that that's set up that would work just as well for the things that the current one works well for, but better for those cases, where the current one isn't working out so well. So where is the current one not working out so well? One area where the current one is a little bit onerous is when you have an application where there might be 10 components in that application, and then you want to cut a new version of that application, but you still need to support the old one. You need to create a whole new application and then re-onboard essentially the 10 components underneath that. And, it's a problem enough that I know that like there was Brock put a lot of effort into trying to like create automation around bootstrapping these new like application versions. But even he working on I think he was calling it the version controller, said, that probably that isn't the best solution. It was just the most achievable one, right? Without sort of blowing up the whole system and changing our data model. So let's set that aside for a minute as problem one. Can we make the experience of supporting multiple concurrent versions and onboarding new concurrent versions, can we make that better? Problem two, which we actually don't have a solution for at the moment, is take my same example of I have an application with 10 components in it, and maybe I have 2 versions of that, or maybe it's just 2 completely different applications, but I have a common container where there's this one container I want to use in 2 different applications, same version of it. Or maybe I want to use it in 100 applications. Maybe it's like a proxy, right? Like a proxy container that somebody produces, and I want to use it in a bunch of different places. I can't use the single component object in our current data model because it is owned by a single application. And by owned, I mean you cannot add a component to 2 applications. It can only be added to one. I also can't reuse that same repository across different workspaces. I think that's a slightly different issue that I'm trying to tackle here. It's a different problem. I think I want to stop there because we might have found a solution to problem 3, but problem 3 is about building artifacts where multiple sources are required. I don't think it fits as neatly into the problem as the first 2. Scott, can you scroll down to, I think there's like some pretty pictures Missy drew for me.
Brian, I know that we said,
this one.
I know that you're saying problem 3 doesn't fit as cleanly, but another problem that could fit more cleanly is building multiple artifacts or being able to build multiple components from a single pipeline run. I think that would make more sense to lump into this model change.
Yeah. Cool. So I think what I think might work well for us for solving a lot of these problems is, I think, best illustrated by this picture that Missy drew for me after trying to explain to her what I was after. But essentially, I want I would like to consider turning the model that we have now upside down. Today, when you go into Konflux, you get a workspace. The first thing you have to do is you create an application, and there's nothing in it. And then you take your empty application and you say, now I'm going to add a component to it. And then you add another component, another component, another component. And if you want to create a new version of your application, you have to go create another application, and it is empty too. And you have to create new components to put into that application, even if it's referencing the same repos. Instead, we could imagine where you would onboard components first, no application. I'm just saying, I have a Git repo, it has a branch in it. I want to create a component so that I can build it. So you could have a bunch of components in a workspace with no applications in that workspace at all. It's just a bunch of individual builds, build things and spit out containers into user workloads. And after you onboard those components, you can come, after you already have successful builds, you can come and you can group those components into applications. I want this component, and this component to be in application A. I want these two components to be in application B. I want these three things to be in version 3.0, whatever. And if you have a shared component that needs to be included in all versions of those applications, that's fine, because applications are just references to a big pile of component builds which exist inside of a workspace. I'm going to stop there because then I'm going to introduce something else and say, does that make sense? Does anybody think that's crazy? Other than the actual work to get it done, which might be crazy, but yeah. Ryan.
So with the three problems you mentioned at the beginning, one of them was application versioning.
Yeah.
And I see how this can make that a lot simpler. If you have, for example, an application with 10 components and there's only 2 components that change between version 1 and version 2.
Yeah.
But what if you have, for example, a single component application where you still want to maintain both versions of that application? In this, like here, you kind of still have to maintain 2 separate components for what is essentially 2 versions of the same thing. So does this enable us to support like component versioning or something else that would make that simpler?
Okay. Well, the thing that I didn't mention, I was going to take questions first. The thing I didn't mention is that the second part of this that I would like to consider is that the components themselves sort of represent access to a Git repo. And the thing that we actually build is a component branch. Always, it's a component branch. And so components could have multiple branches. So you can imagine how you have a component and it's front end, right? And so then you have a branch 1.0 and another branch 2.0 and another branch 3.0. So that when you are actually grouping these things into applications, you're not grouping just components into branches. You're not grouping just components into applications, but you're actually grouping component branches into applications. And so then in your scenario, what would happen is you onboard front end 1.0, and then you create an application to release it. And then you want to come back and add 2.0. You don't create a new component. What you do is you edit your existing component and add a new branch. And then you create a new application referencing the new branch. So you'd have 2 applications, each referencing a discrete branch of one component.
That makes sense. I do have a follow-up question, but I'm going to let everybody else get to their questions first.
I don't know who's next in the queue. Who's
Mikola.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, thank you. So what do we need applications for? Because for now, they are just like an umbrella for the set of components. Since we are building only branches within component, so why do we need those applications? If we could build like combine produced artifacts from different components within applications, then I would see them useful.
If you
right now we can have pipeline within like for application build. So
we can have right. The only purpose of applications is to create snapshots. It's to feed data to what will become the integration service snapshot constructor.
Okay, I see.
That's how I see it.
Okay, yeah. For this, it's useful. I agree. Thank you.
This segues right into the point I'd like to make, which is think about the impact of this on ownership of the CRs. Today, the application and component model is still owned essentially by what was HAS. We had HAS, it did some functional stuff. We removed a lot of the functional stuff. It still has these validating webhooks that manage when you add new applications and new components. But it's kind of weird because there is no HAS anymore. It's this, the application API repo, right, defines it as a common thing. With this change, if we were to adopt it, imagine that the component resource should really start to be owned by build service, because it becomes definitely just about building. And what was the application resource? If we still have a resource for it, maybe it's just a label, right? That's all we do. But that whole API and that design would be owned by integration service, because it's the thing responsible for interpreting the application and using it to construct snapshots. When it comes to release time, the application itself, maybe we should sever the link between the release plans and the applications. And so it becomes something more, well, I don't know. I'll stop there. I don't know if we should go that far.
John? Yeah.
Yeah. In this model, are components always source-based, or are there components that you could model where they are binaries that you're getting from somewhere else and you want to include them as a quote component group, which I think is what you're trying to model as sort of product releases or something, and you're using third-party binaries, but you want to include it as part of something like an operator that a piece isn't built in this system?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't have any issue with, you know, the definition of component being a little more fungible than just source. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, because the current component model, which has all sorts of issues, but also allowed you to have either source ones, which would be built, and then they'd be built at points in time, your branch, which I think you mean commit ID, but a precisely identified point in time that maps to a binary that was produced, but could also be, components could also represent, because it was modeling an app, something you imported that someone else had built, which helps migration as well. So if you couldn't onboard all of Konflux, or, you know, if we use this kind of mapping in RH-TAP, if you couldn't onboard it all at once, you could still model a group and have everything represented. Yeah, thanks.
When you say, though, you said something about, I don't mean a branch, but a specific commit. I mean, obviously we're building a specific commit, but what I mean is that when you're grouping applications together into like versions of applications, that you would say, I'm tracking,
Right.
I want to be tracking a particular branch in this.
Yeah, I get it, but the asset for that branch that was built for that branch would be specific to the point in time you built the branch at a specific commit, because you can add commits after. So it's a lot. So you're saying the group would be a logical thing that says I represent this branch, but somehow you'd be able to tell that it was built at this exact time, and the resource that you actually are collecting is precise, not just a floating branch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I was just wanted to make sure, because that would mean you. The reason I asked is that would mean that you don't create a separate component to track all the individual builds at a specific point in time. That's covered as part of the model, right? I don't need, if I have a branch called main, and I built it 10 times because I had 10 different commits to build, I'm still only gonna have one component labeled the Git and then the main branch, right?
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
Good. Yeah, that's good. Otherwise you're gonna have too many.
Yes, exactly. And then when you create an application, you'd get a list, and main would be on the list, and you'd say, yes, for this version of app, I want this component main, right?
Yeah. I was just applying historical discussions we've had about, you need a component per build that represents a binary, and that won't go anywhere because you just end up copying. Anyways.
Right.
Good. Thanks.
Andrew.
Andrew. Yeah.
It's definitely not anything close to what my first thoughts were about replacing the component application model, John, if that's what you're referring to. Not multitude of CRs being created for each of these different artifacts. I agree that was not the best thought out plan, but I did want to just comment really quickly on what I felt like you were trying to get at with your question. These builds are for specific commits. When they're built, they are associated with a branch, but branches can move in time, and branches can be rewritten such that that commit is no longer in a branch. And so there's no way that you would be able to, or the process of verifying that a commit is, or a commit in a branch results in this artifact isn't the question that we're trying to answer. The question that the only question we would be able to answer is, at the time that this build was run, it had this branch metadata, and it was associated with this commit.
That's all we get now, by the way.
Yeah.
Like I think an important thing to note about this whole discussion about the branches is that we already do this. We already track a branch. We mostly track main, but some people track other branches. What we build today are already component branches. It's just that we only allow a component to have one branch.
Right. And so there would be some, we need to make sure that we can differentiate between whatever this floating reference is to the latest of the branch, without losing the prior builds of those branches as well. Louis, your hands up.
Yeah, something I was thinking of, if the branches is a property of a component, I guess we could have a future version of this where you can provide a regular expression of some sort where it says, all the release branches in my repo, I want to create a component for it and make things a little bit more dynamic that way. That probably will make it easier to onboard a new component. As you create a new release branch, it gets automatically picked up, but you would require some wiring to a component group. But just something to think about.
Yeah.
Louis, what does that make easier? You were talking about onboarding. So like you're coming along with a repo and you have a dozen release branches and you just don't want to specify that dozen explicitly on the components list of branches. You want to supply a pattern.
Yeah, maybe onboarding is not the right term. So for example, you have an application and every now and then you cut a new release branch and it's like release dash 1.0 and then release dash 2.0. If you're already building through Konflux and you have already created stuff for those branches, but then you have a new version, it would be really cool if all I do is create the branch in GitHub and then that automatically propagates to Konflux and Konflux starts building for that.
I understand now. Thank you.
So you're suggesting you don't have to create a new component. The component is wildcarded to accept all the latest release named branches or something?
Yeah, so from Brian's model, the component is a repo, right? Not a branch. So you wouldn't create a new component anyways, but I don't know if that makes sense.
It's essentially like, do you have to go and monkey with on-cell expression every time that you add a new branch, or like, add a new set of pipelines or something like that? And that's like a technical detail we have to figure out, by the way. Is that like, it sounds great to be able to just add a branch and component and like be able to start building them, but somehow you have to tell Pack which pipelines to use for the new branch. And if you're going to reuse pipelines, you have to make updates to those pipelines. So there's probably some version of what we do now where we have to like send a commit to a repo that has to, as a pull request that gets merged to like actually make the change needed to the either new pipelines or to the existing pipelines to actually make those new branches build.
If the branches aren't explicitly listed in our API resources, then there won't be a way for the UI to list all the branches that it's building. Like that truth will be essentially in Git, waiting for you to create that branch. And maybe that's okay. It's just that's a trade-off from I think what we would have now, where you have a nice explicit representation of all those things if we wanted to show the user what branches they're building in our UI.
Our UI will happily lie to you about what it's building, though. And if you can set it up if you go and change the branch you're tracking in your pipeline, the UI doesn't know you did that.
Right.
And Ralph, I think one of the changes that would need to be associated with this is the ability for the UI to display pipeline runs that aren't associated with applications. So what I mentioned in the sidebar is that applications, or the replacement for applications, these component groups are a tool we can use for visualization, for releasing, for testing. The absence of a component group is also a valid set of component groups for at least visualization.
I think we've exhausted the queue of questions. I guess my question back to everyone else is, does anyone think this is a terrible idea? Should we start investing some amount of capacity into like trying to find poke holes in this and understanding what it would take to get from point A to point B? Is there anyone that thinks it's like a fantastic idea and that it's like the biggest problem that we have to solve? I don't even think I'm there, but just gauging people's level of enthusiasm, I guess.
Well,
Cool.
to me, having multiple versions of component in the single objects looks way better than copying like we do now. So I'm +1.
Yeah, +1 here too. It's going to be an expensive change, right? Lots of things will have to change to adjust to this, but we've put it off for too long. We should move forwards.
Okay.
I think we should try it. I still am unclear. I assume there was a component per branch, is what you were saying earlier, but then Louis said there's only one component for many branches, and
yeah,
that's a huge difference. And in your picture, it looks like the same component. There's 3 of the same component A, or lots of them. I can't tell, such a small font on my screen. But you have 3 different components with this. For I don't know. I can look at the thing. I'm just not looking on my screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
3
So
definitions
the way
of component A, or component A is a single thing with some array of V1, 1, 2, and 3.
That's it. We need to draw a box around.
Thank you.
component A. Yeah.
No, I'm good with that, because as soon as Louis said, what Louis said was there's only one and you have all of them represented in it. That's the right model. This is because it is one thing. It's just points in time that you care about, that you want to track. So you don't want 2 component A's floating around for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my hope, laying out the user experience, like what I hope to get out of this at the end would be that if I want to add a new version to my application, what I do is I create my branches in Git. I add those branches to the existing components in Konflux. And then I just create a new grouping, whatever we call it a new application today, and say, these are all the branches that I need in this application. It could be all new branches. It could be a mix of existing ones that are in the old application and new ones. And then that's it, right?
So probably go too deep on this, but the question I have then is the same as Andrew's mentioned: mono repos that might produce 2 binaries out of the same Git repo.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you'd model those as 2 components with the same Git repo, or one. I don't understand how those would be modeled, because the Git repo is the same, so that can't be the unique ID anymore for 2 different binaries.
So In a previous version of this document, I had listed that as one of the problems to solve was like building Tecton, for example, with it needs to produce multiple artifacts from a single build pipeline, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that we should build into this model a way to say for application or for component C, I'm expecting 4 things, right?
Right.
Or whatever. But I actually thought it was you, Andrew, but maybe not since you brought it up. But maybe it was Ralph. I've become more convinced recently that we should just use OCI indexes for that and let the component emit the index digest. And it has references to all the things that were produced in the pipeline in it. And it's not like a gross misuse of like manifest lists like it would have been in the past, where we have OCI indexes which are specifically built for this now, and it seems like a pretty good solution for that.
I know Andrew's raised his hand. I have to think about it because you have a monorepo is going to produce 4 different components, all with 4, say for example, different programming languages, so probably different pipelines even.
Yeah, but separate those cases though. Sorry, I think monorepo is a different use case than like co-build.
Oh yeah,
a co-build is
totally.
one pipeline, 4 artifacts. A monorepo with 4 builds should be 4 components with on-cell expression.
I think you're exactly where I was thinking. Like if they're separate, they just happen to map to the same repo, but they're building separate things. But if it's a single build that produces multiple binaries, then I agree with you.
And I would love to get to the point where we can have more interaction in the UI, so that if I say I want to create a component and it is a monorepo and I only want to respond to changes, like imagine you could see like a file tree picker and you can be like, I want this directory, and this directory, and that we could actually build the on-cell expression and put it into the pull request for the pipeline that gets sent to the user. Because those things are finicky. I've done it a bunch of times and they're like tricky. But it would be really nice if we could bring that in, and it would make onboarding monorepos different. But that's a different.
Yeah, the monorepo cases, it can be called separately. And I agree with you with the multiple outputs. Single pipeline can produce as many binaries as it likes. Multi-arch could be one case, could be debug and non-debug versions of the container. Lots of really good use cases. So absolutely.
Okay, the questions are stacking up. Andrew.
Yeah, it wasn't me that you talked with about the image index. I know that Ralph and I have talked about the use of image index and image manifest, and especially for multiple different artifact types. I would be, we don't have to get into it now because it's ultimately going to be implementation detail. I would be hesitant to use an image index to represent the accumulation of multiple different artifacts, because those artifacts aren't the exact same thing. The relationship is more tenuous, and I think that we would be better served by figuring out a way to break the one-to-one relationship, or to split apart the one-to-one relationship between the pipeline run and the artifacts that are produced, because that would also allow you to more easily separate any of those sub-components, sub-artifacts within the pipeline run to be released separately, if you only need to push out a fix for one. Louis, I think you're next.
Yeah, Louis.
Okay. Could that be in this model, Brian? Could that be a case where the same component branch goes to multiple applications?
Yes.
So a box on the left has 2 arrows coming out of it.
That is actually it's here. Look at component D. Or hang on, there should be one here. Can you zoom out? I can't see the whole thing. I thought we had it. I thought we had just explicitly tried to show that. Is there anything that's reused?
Show what,
Now,
sorry?
The picture. It's still the picture.
Okay.
Yeah, is there anything with 2 arrows coming out of it?
I don't see a single component going to multiple.
Yeah, okay. That was definitely a thing we definitely wanted to cover here. So we should add that to the diagram to show that it's possible.
Okay. The,
Well, sorry, when you fold it into the one component and then multiple branches tagged off, you'll get that multiple lines coming already. It's just that you've duplicated the components. Sorry, Louis.
no worries. So I wonder if what is the, because I'm trying to understand how this is gonna work. So I feel like there should be like a component instant kind of resource that captures, this is a thing that was produced for this component branch. And there should be like a component group instance that maps different one of those into a particular group. I'm just trying to understand how the information is going to flow through here. Like a component, something's built for a particular branch, and we know that for a component A branch V1, like how does the data go? Like what represents that thing that was built? Is it just the pipeline run?
Yeah,
Or
it's
is
just a
it-
pipeline run. It's simple.
Okay.
I think it's much simpler than we're thinking about it. It's you have a list of branches that you want pipelines as code to respond to for each component. You want it to build for main. You want it to build for V2. You want it to build for V3. Anytime a commit or a pull request against that comes in, you build, right? And anytime a pipeline run finishes, I don't know what it is, but it could be that snapshot constructor mechanism, right? Is trying to figure out, do I need to construct a snapshot for the thing that was just built? What applications or component groupings is it included in? And
Okay.
then it goes and starts forming these groups and creates the CRs that are snapshots. And after that, everything just goes like it normally does.
Okay.
Back on the OCI result, I'm sorry, using an image index to model multiple artifacts coming out of a single component build on a single branch, like using Co for Tecton. I think one of the things that moved me to think more seriously about just using a single image index for that is the result size issue. If you have a single pipeline run that's producing a ton of different artifacts, at some point we're going to run into an issue where that task is producing too many results, and we're going to overflow that bound. But if we insist that it just produces a single image index pull spec, then we keep that. We avoid running into that problem.
Right. And I don't see any downsides to it either. Like, it actually makes setting up this much easier. Like, I imagine setting up a component to build a Co pipeline or build a Co, run Co. It's going to have N artifacts. It's just not clear, like, what the advantage is for me to have to declare them all explicitly on the component in advance. It's just more setup. Nicola?
Sorry, maybe not directly related to what's been said, but just my thoughts. It would be useful, in my opinion, to have a common pipeline definitions for the component for all versions. That way, we wouldn't need to handle a lot of pull requests in each branch, like we do now. But we would like to keep ability to override, for example, for older versions. So, in my opinion, it would be nice to have like specific branch where a common definition is placed and it's used. And if you want to override, we can still put config in the specific branch. So because like having to bump, all the configs in all the versions is the same problem which we have now, right?
So that'd be like a pipelines as code feature.
Yes,
They
probably.
support. I think what I understand is they support today. You can always use the pipeline from the commit being run, or you can always use the pipeline from a specific branch or commit, like git ref. we would need to teach pipelines code how to take those things and like merge them together. Essentially.
Well, we can try to reference pipeline via Git resolver or something like this, via annotation. So we would have just a stub like pipeline run in every branch, but it would be like only reference. Yeah, it would still have parameters in place, but yeah, it would mitigate it a bit.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I wonder what we should do. We don't know yet how all the bits here will work, but when we get closer to knowing, we'll have to think about migration, right? Is this something that people switch to on a workspace by workspace basis? Do we switch a whole cluster at once? Do the resources have new names? Like, do we still call it component, or do we give it some new name? There's a period of time where we have something in place that's like reconciling today's versions of these resources into the new versions of these resources on the side, so that everybody has a kind of silent, dark copy of the new API that is in place but isn't being used by controllers yet. And then we can migrate controllers one by one to use these new resources that should be kept aligned by some migration controller.
I've given some thought to migration, and it's why I said earlier that if you imagine today, our components are just like these components, except they only track one branch. We probably need to make, I think it depends on if we decide we want to enumerate those branches as like properties of the CR. You might want to do that, or if you want to rely on just setting the branches to track in the pipeline, in the pipelines as code, Tecton pipelines, right? You can tell it what branch to run. Do we want to do that and then just see what branches, come in and list them there? Like, here's all the branches that I see for this component in Tecton results, right? But either way, I think there's probably a pretty straightforward way to migrate what we have as a component today to what we need as a component in this model. The application thing, I think it's like, what I was imagining is that you could probably have both application models live next to each other for some period of time. There's nothing that would prevent you from introducing a new CR for these component groups and referencing components that are actually owned by another application, right? So we would need to define like what we want that kind of migration experience to be. And I guess the one thing that I'm 100% on is there has to be a migration. Like, I don't think we want to maintain both models forever. And I definitely will not stand for us telling users, delete your application and create a new one. Or, delete all your components and create these new objects. Basically go through onboarding again. We can't do that. We'll have a revolt.
We have to deal with all the users we have using GitOps, right? Who are like applying their components in their current spec and schema to the cluster. And at some point, we'll need to update those definitions in Git.
Yep.
Cool.
Mikola, did you have your hand up and it went down? What's it?
Yeah, you basically covered.
Okay.
I wanted to say something.
Cool. Yeah, well, if there's, we've taken up a lot of time on this. We can move on if you want, but it's good to get your feedback and to hear that in general, people think we should do some more investigation here so we can try and figure out how to slot it into existing priorities. Thank you for feedback. And feel free to comment in the doc, and I will keep going through that and trying to respond and refine. Gal.
Yeah, I think that we should set a due date. Not tomorrow or next month, right? But let's say end of Q1 next year. Something that we can aim to finish this work. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I don't think it will happen. We will just keep discussing.
Yeah. Agreed. Like some aspirational date to kind of shoot for would be good. One reason I actually sat on this for a long time is because a bunch of architects got distracted by a project going on that we had. And also we haven't had as much contributions on the user interface side. And obviously we will need to make some, maybe not like massive, but like we're going to have to change some stuff on the UI side about how onboarding works, about how, maybe we have different CRs. So I wanted to wait until I felt like we were about to have enough capacity to manage such a change. And it looks like that's coming. So, Mikola.
Yeah, another maybe crazy idea following this new architecture. So what if applications could have own pipeline definition to just combine build by component artifacts? It would solve some of existing problem and releases as a problem 3, if I'm not mistaken. So for example, we would have 3 artifacts that would produce like a lib and some consumer of it and Docker image, and then with application pipeline, we can combine everything together. Also, that would be very useful for releasing something like UBI, because we could like have components for every RPM we need to include in the image. And then we would have application pipelines that just consumes all the component artifacts and puts it into the final image. I don't know how much it makes sense, but just an idea I've got.
Something to think about with that is that there can be a really long chain of those application composition steps that, there's RPMs that go into UBI, but then UBI is used as a base image for other images. And then those images are used as operands in an operator. And that operator needs to update its FBC. And so we could approach that, but it's hard to find the bounds where that should stop.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's move on, because I know that there's at least, Andrew, why don't you take yours next, since I took up 45 minutes.
Sure. I mean, what I had, it's nothing that big or drastic. There are some questions that I received from individuals about where should they put troubleshooting information for tasks. There's some new changes being added to the tasks that I didn't feel right about introducing dependencies between the documentation or between Konflux CI/docs and the build definitions repo. And so I just wanted to propose the idea of creating usage and troubleshooting markdown documents as needed within the task directories and build definitions, with the intention of eventually being able to merge those together or to render those for inclusion in the documentation. But then if we have tasks that we need to help users with trying to troubleshoot, then we can just link them to the build definitions repo to get that help.
I think it's a really good idea. I think it would be awesome to have task specific, like contextual help available.
Go.
I also think that Louis is probably working on something right now where he could really use that.
I love the idea. It would be great also to check if we can, when a task fails, we can print the URL to the troubleshooting doc, the console. And then the user will get the feedback and just click a button and go to the troubleshooting.
Would that be from like a show summary? The show summary task would, or it wouldn't be able to be if the task fails, because then no future tasks are run. But within each, you should be reporting the URL.
URL be fine. Totally love the idea. I just want to comment about how RHTAP was trying to do this, because RHTAP for Backstage is generating doc in what's called tech docs, and it was copying from the spec of the tasks, so that when you give someone a free set of pipelines, you also and tasks, they also get a free set of docs to tell them how to deal with those things that you just gave them for free. Because a lot of this stuff, when you bootstrap people, they then have to go learn everything you gave them, and it's a real pain in the butt. So having the ability to easily find how to troubleshoot FAQs or other things, and in the tech docs use case, those docs can get customized for where you put those things in their repos. Instead of saying, go to your repo and find the Tecton task that does this, you can tell them, here is where to find the thing you're running specifically. And that way, all the kind of junk you do debugging, you can get to it a lot sooner. So +1 for me if we can do that and then reuse that in lots of different ways, including Backstage.
Thanks, John. I'll have to figure out the details of that.
Cool.
Gal, did you have a question?
No, I said what I had.
So I guess then on the other one we skipped, this is more of a, so I was talking with some folks who are wanting to build packs. We've been kind of working with them on and off for a while, and we've gone through a lot of iterations about how we might be able to do this. But one thing is that the pack CLI doesn't work with Podman without a Docker socket. And so without a bunch of changes that we don't want to make to our cluster nodes, we can't run pack in a Tecton spawned Kubernetes pod. So one way around that, the gal you put into the doc is to use multi-platform controller, and that is indeed what we're going to try first, is to start doing some builds using pack in multi-platform controller hosts. But another thing that we were talking about was whether or not we should look at making optional Knative support for spawning VMs on cluster. Like whether we should support that at all, like upstream as an add-on, right? Using our kind of new model that we set out as like a core and add-on. If we should figure out how to support that as an optional component, and whether we would want to make that available on our own clusters.
How Knative is related to VMs feature profile?
I'm sorry, what?
How Knative is related to VMs?
Sorry, I think I mean to say CNV, not Knative. My bad.
Ah,
Yeah. Or Kubevirt, something like that.
Yeah,
I
Kubevirt.
see.
I just put the wrong thing in. Kubevirt, CNV.
I see. The issue is that those require bare metal nodes.
Because of the nested vert stuff,
Yes.
right? And those are not
This
supported on our Amazon nodes, right?
Yes, it would be like a nightmare to get this thing working. Bare metal clusters are not easy to install, to manage, and there is no manage offer.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It makes sense. Okay. So I think let's not pursue this for now, and we'll just chase on the multi-platform controller nodes. That makes sense.
Yeah. Can't you get nested vert on your clusters?
No, it's not supported.
EC2 has it, I thought, or where? Oh, okay.
So there is
That's
like you can make it work, but then we would need to ask for exceptions, and we won't get support from such platform.
I think you used the magic words. You can make it work, which delivers the whole story without me knowing any more about it. Yeah, I assumed you could just get a nested vert cluster or VM and it'll all work, but
I think you need, I think what I heard is you need to get special instances from EC2 to have
Okay.
nested at all. And that ROSA doesn't support nested vert. So if we run into problems using it, they're going to be like, it's on you.
Yes.
And I forgot about that. Yeah. Cool.
I'm good. Thanks.
Thanks. Anything else? Back to you, Scott, I guess.
Gabe.
Yeah, I just wanted real quick. This is my last week on Konflux, so I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for all the collaboration and support over the years. I'm not leaving Red Hat, but I'm going to a different org. So, yeah.
That means we can find you.
Yeah.
You to start wearing a fake disguise to work, big glasses, nose.
Exactly.
Thank you, Gabe, for everything.
Oh,
Yep.
no, I appreciate that, Gail. Likewise, to everybody here. It's been,
What are you going to do? What are you going to do?
I'm, folks, you all know, I'm going to work for Anne Marie and Adam Bergstein on DevTools AI stuff.
Good luck.
Good luck. I'm sure we'll see
Appreciate
you
it.
around.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Great call, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.